The same journal, the Naval Institute Journal, published an acid review of the Navy Department cover-up written by a Marine Corps colonel, retired Marine Corps colonel, military historian David Evans. He quotes one high military officer attending the official hearings who concluded that our Navy is too dangerous to deploy. Well, that was taken care of by Bush #1. Remember, that's the liberal Bush. He said, I will never apologize for the United States of America. I don't care what the facts are. Well, Iranians do care what the facts are, and they've surely not forgotten, plus a lot more, back to 1953 when the U.S. and Britain overthrew the parliamentary government and installed a brutal tyrant. Forgetting is a luxury, but only for those who hold the clubs, like us. We can forget. The victims can't forget. Well, support for Saddam Hussein continued. It went on after the end of the Iraq War with no change. After Saddam Hussein's worst crimes, the atrocities against the Kurds, after the chemical warfare against Iran, still went on. And the way it went on is kind of remarkable. Here's some testimony before the Senate by Gary Milholland. He's one of the major nuclear experts in the United States. He points out that in 1989, remember, 1989, just remember what was going on then, the Pentagon and the Department of Energy invited 3 Iraqi scientists, with the blessing of the Department of State, to attend a detonation conference in Portland, Oregon. There they learned from experts all over the world how shockwaves detonate nuclear weapons. These 3 Iraqis came from the site that produced the first components for Iraq's high explosive portion of its first nuclear weapon. That's 1989, long after the end of the war with Iran, after the worst massacres and crimes for which we now claim we have to punish Saddam Hussein. Also continuing at that time was same aid, biotoxins, means to develop nuclear weapons and missiles, chemical warfare, and so on. And George Bush #1 gave the reasons, not a secret. It was challenged on that. He said, well, we have a responsibility to aid U.S. exporters. Besides, support for Saddam Hussein improves stability in the region. Okay, that went on up till probably the day of the invasion of Kuwait, same as the British. And it went on after the first war against Iraq. After. At the end of the war, February 1991, the U.S. had total control of the region. Absolute Iraqi army, totally smashed. You may recall then that there was an uprising, Shiite uprising in the south, which the U.S. actually called for. And yes, there was a rebellion. Actually, it was assisted by rebelling Iraqi generals. They didn't ask the U.S. for any help, but they didn't expect what happened. What happened is that the Bush administration authorized Saddam Hussein to massacre them. They didn't say do it. They just authorized them to use military aircraft, heavy equipment, to slaughter the Shiite rebels. Probably tens of thousands of them. That's 1991. Well, again, the victims don't forget. And that was explained too. We prefer to forget, but it was explained. Actually, it was explained in the New York Times. The Middle East correspondent of the New York Times, Alan Cowell, is still there. He wrote, he said,
suiciders to kill innocent life, who had relations with Zarqawi. Imagine what the world would be like with him in power. The idea is to try to help change the Middle East. Now look, part of the reason we went into Iraq...
Well, we're kind of upset about these massacres, which the Shiites probably would have overthrown Saddam Hussein. But he said there was a consensus among the U.S. and its allies, that means Britain and Saudi Arabia, there was a consensus that Saddam Hussein offered more hope for the stability of the region than those who were trying to overthrow him. In other words, Iraqis do not have the right to overthrow Saddam Hussein. It's not going to be allowed, because then they'll be running their own country. So therefore we'll support Saddam Hussein. the chief diplomatic correspondent of the New York Times.
With UNSCOM's mandate, the biological weapons program had been declared in its totality late in the game, but it was gone. All the major facilities eliminated. The nuclear weapons program, again, completely eliminated. The long-range ballistic missile program, completely eliminated. All that was left was the research and development and manufacturing capability for missiles with a range less than 150 kilometers, a permitted activity. Everything that we set out to destroy in 1991, the physical infrastructure had been eliminated. So if I had to quantify...
It's a technical name that means pretty much State Department representative in the New York Times. That was Thomas Friedman at the time. He explained it. He said, from the U.S. government point of view, he said, the best of all worlds for Iraq would be an iron-fisted military junta ruling Iraq the same way Saddam did. He's kind of an embarrassment, but we got to get somebody just like him. If we can't get him, we'll have to be satisfied. If there isn't anyone else, it'll have to be him. That's after the slaughter of the Shiites. Anybody remembering any of that? Like, it's not a deep secret. You don't look at classified information, just at the main newspaper in the world. Well, that's again for those who have the luxury of forgetting. It's easy to forget. Victims don't. This and a lot more raises a number of questions, namely, who should be in the dock alongside of Saddam Hussein for these crimes alone? Well, that's another question that can't be asked, can't be considered. What should be done about Iraq? It is a real problem. Americans are right to regard it as a serious problem. Well, before trying to answer that question, you have to be clear about some basic principles. And there's one fundamental principle. That principle is that invading armies have no rights whatsoever. They have responsibilities, but no rights. Their responsibilities are, first of all, doesn't matter whether it's the Russians in Afghanistan, the U.S. in Iraq, or anybody else, the Japanese in North China, pick your example. They have the responsibility, first of all, to pay reparations. In fact, enormous reparations to the victims. In this case, it's reparations not only for the invasion and the atrocities and so on and everything that followed the supreme international crime, but also for the sanctions, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, devastated the civilian society, strengthened the tyrant, probably preserved him, kept him from being overthrown the way other tyrants that the U.S. and Britain backed were overthrown, many of them quite similar to him. So reparations for that, and in fact a lot more. Reparations for the support for Saddam Hussein during the 1980s, during the period of his worst crimes. That's not just the U.S. and Britain, it's also others, like Germany and Russia and France and others. Yeah, they all owe massive reparations. These are points that generalize well beyond. The second responsibility of invaders is to follow the will of the victims. Well, we have a pretty good sense of what that is. There are regular U.S., British-run studies of popular opinion. The most recent one, a couple of weeks ago, was reported. Brookings Institution does a regular analysis of what they call the state of Iraq. It was published, you can find it in the New York Times. According to them, 87% of Iraqis want a concrete timeline for U.S. withdrawal. Well, that's up from 76% a year earlier. Well, if those figures are accurate, they're astonishing. What that means is approximately 100% of Iraqis in Arab Iraq. The Kurds don't care. There's no troops up there. But it means, if the figures are right, about 100% of Iraqis in Arab Iraq, where there actually are occupying forces, want a concrete timeline for withdrawal. I think if you had done a poll in Vichy, France, or say in Poland under Russian occupation, you would not have found figures like that. It's almost certain. Another thing to think about. Bush and Blair have an answer to that. Simple answer: no, there cannot be a timeline for withdrawal. Well, in part that just reflects the imperial mentality, deeply rooted imperial mentality. The voice of the lower orders just doesn't matter. So